Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for attending. Much appreciated. As you can see from the slide, so I'm Andy Slater. I'm from Fact360, and the purpose of today's session really is to introduce you to the Fact360 platform and how it can be utilised in an investigative format. Also with me on the call, I've got Jonathan Dreyer, who works for Oculus, and he's going to take you through a specific use case where they have used this technology in their environment during a live investigation. I'll also have Paddy Lawton, who will come on after Jonathan, who will conduct a demonstration of the platform, and Paddy is one of the co-founders of the company. So no further ado, obviously if you've got any questions, either use the chat room or please shout out. We're easy either way. And I'm going to drop off video while I do the presentation just so it runs a little more smoothly. So there's the agenda. Hopefully this it makes pretty good sense. So Fact360, we sort of founded in 2017, and the whole concept of what we deliver was born out of a academic project actually being run out of Goldsmiths University. And that was a program where they built an AI platform that could identify anomalies in digital communications. And in around 2000 and towards the end of 2018, Paddy took over the funding of that project within the university. And then in March of last year, we brought across the entire project, the IP and all the team, the development team across into Fact360, and that's when we were born. The two key things to take away from this as we go through the presentation, and particularly when Jonathan is describing how they utilize the tool, is that everything we do is about identifying anomalies in behavior within a communications network, a digital communications network. And when we deploy the technology and we input data into it, it does everything and it creates everything in an unsupervised way. So we do not have to drive it with any form of language control or changing algorithms or training it to be able to deliver the data set you need. Okay, so the tool itself will help and guide you as an investigator. Now we deliver two products on this platform. One is around investigation and the other is around wellness. So we take the same math and the same algorithms, but we're able to deliver 5 key metrics that enable organizations to identify the wellness of their organization by looking at things like collaboration and participation and work-life balance, that type of thing as well. So anyway, coming back to the investigation piece, I think, if we look at the whole e-discovery market and sort of why the tools exist in that space, people like Nuix, people like Relativity and OpenText and Everlaw, they exist because it's a huge challenge trying to manage massive documents and massive digital corpuses of data. So the concept being that the e-discovery platforms came into fruition to enable that process to be simplified. And what they enable you to do is to create this sort of giant filing cabinet and be able to search for things and be able to run it as a case management platform. The key difference here, you can run through this slide to the end, please. The key thing here is looking at what Fact360 does in terms of being different. What we're doing is we're taking that information into our platform pre the e-discovery phase, and we're leveraging the structure of that comms network, and that can be any form of digital communication. Okay, that can be email, it could be Slack, it could be WhatsApp, it could be Signal, it can be Bloomberg chat room, it can be transcribed voice. And what we do is we're looking to identify the unknown unknowns, and according to Wikipedia, what that really is the things that you didn't know you were looking for. Because one of the challenges with traditional e-discovery is there is already a bias in the human being, i.e. in the investigator. So they go looking for information to support their thought process or their belief of what the case should deliver up to them. And what we're saying here is, well, you should approach it from a slightly different perspective and use Fact360 to help you identify the anomalies in the behavior and in the network. So what that enables us to do at an early case assessment stage is enable you to accurately scope the project and really just identify how much of the information is relevant, because interestingly, and again, the guys will talk about this, but if you've got a case where you've got 1 million documents, we believe we will reduce the amount of data that you need to input into an e-discovery platform in terms of building out base numbers and the case management capabilities by circa 95%, because most of it has no relevance or bearing, because it's not anomalous and it doesn't relate to the case itself. Now, by doing that, there are some, as you can imagine, there are some significant cost savings to be had, just really around, firstly, the e-discovery software and the infrastructure to run that platform, but more importantly, the amount of time one would spend physically researching and investigating the data. So an example, we worked with a company in British Virgin Islands. They had about 120,000-ish emails, and it took one individual 4 months to go through each of those to provide some form of forensic investigation. And part of the challenge with that is not just the time, it's sort of going a little bit blind to what you're looking for. So again, the tool can help with that. And that really enables you to maximize cost savings and use your budget correctly as you go into this ECA phase. So as I said, the key with the platform, to remember, is that we're looking to identify subtle changes in behavior because they represent themselves as anomalies. And we do that without any form of complex language controls. And it enables us to alert the investigator, the unknown unknown, because once you've got visibility of those, that then enables you as an investigator to start to drill down and identify the information that would support those anomalies, because those anomalies might be good anomalies or bad anomalies. We don't know. The tool doesn't know. But what the tool does is it takes this data set and enables you to be directed towards this anomalous data. So a little bit of a history lesson, but it's just fascinating sort of where this concept came from for the team that started at Goldsmiths. This is based upon some work that was performed by Gordon Welchman during World War II. He was based in Bletchley Park, in the hut next to where Alan Turing was actively trying to crack the Enigma code. But what Gordon Welchman was doing was he was building out a visual network of the German commanders about how they communicated. So commanders A through Z, how A spoke to B and B to D and so on and so forth. So he created a network that really represented and a behavior, sort of the frequency and the density and how long and who were on these communications, to create what was a baseline of behavior over a period of time. Because again, this is all very temporal and enables to look at these anomalies over significant periods of time, depending upon how much data we give the tool. But what Gordon Welchman was able to do then was start to identify anomalies in those communications. And once he identified them, he was then able to feed that to the powers that be, because they fundamentally related to potential attacks on the UK mainland. And this was all done without understanding the language content underneath, because the Enigma code hadn't been cracked at this point. And so what we've done is we've taken that process, or the idea of that process, and aligned that to looking at a modern day digital communications network. And so, as I said, what we do is we input this corpus of digital communications. And an example, we've just delivered a project where we've taken 1.2 million Office 365 emails, input into the system. Those emails are over a period of 4 years. And we build this network, and we're able to work within this network now and identify when someone's behavior changes, and that creates this this alert or this target for an anomaly. So what we're able to do here is identify, by doing that, people that require further investigation. And we're doing that, we call it prestige, but it's recognizing the importance of somebody within that communications network. And if it behaves in an odd manner, it will be highlighted as an anomaly, and that then enables us to drill further down into the tool. So at this point, all we're doing here is we're not looking at the content, the language of the emails or whatever communication it is. All we need for this is a digital comms with a sender and a receiver, and we create this network that then shows how people's, as I say, their prestige changes over time. Once we've identified an anomaly, and certain person's behavior. The other part of the tool, what we're doing is and it's called the Topic Explorer, and Paddy will demonstrate this in great detail, and that is we provide some concept analysis that is very different to what everybody else does in the market today. What we do is we take the language content within all of these communications, and what we do is we analyze all of that language. We tag each word relative to its meaning, and that meaning being how it relates to the sentence it sits within, not just it's a word. Then what we do is so we can take it in terms of what it means within the sentence, not just sentiment, but what it actually means. And then we build those into topics, and those topics come with titles. So this now takes you as an investigator down a journey, because it will show you what topics are available, so you can then choose what to go and look for. And what this creates is an ability to remove all human bias from the investigation, because an example where we were working with a law firm, they had already built themselves a catalogue of 3,000 search terms to try and identify some data. And when we deployed the technology, an example being we identified the main protagonist in their case literally within a matter of minutes of the tool finishing ingesting the data. And we were then able to drill down into all of that person's communications and find all of his protagonists, all of the discussions he was having about fixing what he was fixing, etc. And this clustering technology is all based around natural language understanding, which again is very different to what anybody else does in the market today. So that's the introduction finished now to Fact360. I'm going to hand over now to Jonathan, who's going to take you through a case where Oculus have physically used the technology. And once then he's finished, Paddy will take us through a demonstration. So thank you very much for your time. I hope that is clear what we do, and over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you everyone for coming along today and listening to that's really interesting. Fact360 has got incredible potential as a tool for us as an investigator. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about who we are and then talk to you about a recent case which Andy referred to where we use Fact360. We're a strategic advisory intelligence firm. We're set up on the principles used in military intelligence. We were founded in 2016 primarily to leverage whistleblower investigations. However, recognizing there was a market gap for an agile financial intelligence firm, we brought together individuals from the legal, financial, and analytical skill sets and sectors and used this to set up Oculus as it currently is. What do? We primarily collect intelligence and information to help our clients mitigate financial risks, make rational, verified, evidence-based decisions, and investigate financial crimes. We look to provide real facts and identify the reality of any given situation. Next slide, please. Our services can be catered for anyone, and our client base can vary from individuals to governments. However, today we're going to talk about market manipulation, why it's a problem, and what it is that we can do about it. What is market manipulation? I know everyone talks about it, but please allow me to give a very brief overview. It's basically, in a nutshell, a deliberate attempt to interfere with the free and fair operation of the financial market. And it can take various forms: spoofing, driving a financial agenda to drive a price in the market, insider trading, individuals profiting from inside information, stop hunting, forcing other competitors out of a market, front running, the illegal practice of purchasing a security based on advanced non-public information, and ramping, the practice of trying to boost the price of the share with the object of raising demand. What's the commonality of all of these? The commonality is all human user for financial profit and gain. This is a huge problem for financial investigators and regulators. Preventing and investigating market manipulation. And now I'll explain to you how that's going and why this can be improved. In 2020, JP Morgan were fined almost 1 billion for market manipulation. Why is this important? We're talking about one of the largest blue chip, most successful banks in the world. On a cost perspective for JP Morgan, the fine's absolutely huge and the reputational damage is potentially unquantifiable. Looking at it from the investigator side and from the regulatory body's investigation side, the actual man-hour input and cost of the man-hours combined with significant resources required for the investigation is also huge. A recent example and a snapshot of the scale of the problem is this. In 2017, the FCA announced that 18% of all UK companies making official announcements about company takeovers recorded abnormal share prices. What does that mean? That means that potentially 1 in 5 UK companies engaged in takeovers are the subject of market manipulation. That is an absolutely staggeringly high statistic. What are the common failures? How is this happening? Basically, a total lack of effective control from top to bottom. It's a case of reacting, not preventing. And what I mean by that is that compliance and compliance teams are often treated as an afterthought, combined with the fact that in large corporations, you have these different compliance teams, multiple teams, often in different locations, ineffectively communicating with each other, looking at data that's stored in different places in different formats. Investigation and control is difficult to implement. It's difficult to implement because the data is hard to access, is often unreadable. Companies and regulatory bodies lack the necessary resources and expertise to prevent this. And ultimately, the system is too heavily reliant on individuals whistleblowing. Additionally, there's a low prosecution rate. There's not enough prevention. The idea that one can do this and maybe get away with it. This is because of a lack of sufficient evidence, a lack of being able to identify sufficient evidence, and often because of all of the combination of the reasons that I've just mentioned. The FCA conducted 10 insider trading prosecutions in 5 years, securing 12 convictions. To me, this represents a ridiculously low statistic, given that potentially 1 in 5 companies, as I mentioned before, during takeover are the subject of market manipulation every single year. We understand, and the world understands that it's a difficult crime to investigate. It's basically because of human error and human user. And what I mean by that is that you have a combination of bad actors using sophisticated communications, which are often encrypted, deploying code words to help camouflage the reality of what may be going on. This is very hard to get behind. How do you know that somebody's talking to somebody? How do you know who the third person is that may be in the chain? It's very difficult. However, all is not lost. Communication intelligence can be used to help combat that. What is communication intelligence? It's the analysis of communication information collected during an investigation to provide insight. This insight can show you what evidence may look like and where it is, and help identify evidence. Oculus makes use of the intelligence cycle in early case assessment. What is this? It's the process for efficiently collecting data that can be used by enforcement bodies or litigators. It's a process by way in which we go about conducting our investigations. We apply these assessments using the intelligence cycle on a daily basis. This is a core tool to help us as investigators. Why? It helps us in understanding our own bias, which is critical, using analytical tools effectively, and effectively analyzing communications. Ultimately, we're attempting to identify known knowns. That's investigating a known smoking gun. We're attempting to identify known unknowns. That's information that we know exists, but we don't know where it is, and unknown unknowns, information I didn't know existed and I don't know where it is. These are all important in identifying intelligence. Our experience in using intelligence tools makes us realize that we need effective intelligence analysis software to be able to identify the known knowns and beyond. A good example of this is a recent case where Fact360 was used to help investigate and collect evidence to show that individuals at a large financial corporation have been potentially involved in price fixing. The challenge facing the case were large amounts of unstructured data, large amounts of unstructured communications and voice data that needed to be made into a readable format and being able to be searchable by investigators. So step 1 was the conversion into a readable format, and it had to be made searchable and user-friendly to be digestible and then organized. How does one actually read the data to make it understandable, to allow an investigation to commence? How does it actually work and what are its benefits? The tool allowed us to identify key relationships that were known and key relationships that were unknown. Using the tool, we were able to highlight individuals that previously we didn't know were important as part of the investigation. To us, that's a critical service, something that may often be overlooked and something the compliance team will often overlook. The benefits of this all mean that we were able to digest structurable, readable data, and significantly for a company and its overheads, the reduction of man hours and the dedicated resources required to investigate was significantly reduced. Regulatory and enforcement bodies have their own tools and teams in place, but ultimately they're struggling. This is a really common and prevalent financial crime, and one that is very difficult to drill down into because ultimately it's individual user and bad actors, and ultimately identifying who the real bad actors are and who else is involved is something that needs to be investigated properly. Intelligence tools like FAT360 can be used by these bodies and litigators. They can help us identify evidence in an investigation, including FAT360. The reason why these tools work is that they identify anomalies in the large amounts of unstructured data without committing huge resources, and they enhance current compliance controls and allow investigators like Oculus to go about doing their jobs effectively and turning insight into evidence for use in prosecution. The last expression I've been promised a military colleague of mine that I will throw in, and that's the absence of the normal, the presence of the abnormal, is something that really captures what we're trying to drill into. And with that, do we have any questions?
Okay, so I think at this stage, let's hand over to Paddy, and then Paddy can run the demo. So,
okay, coming up. Give me 2 seconds just to get the right screen, as usual. Okay, so what we've got, you should all see this now.
yeah.
What we're going to do is, obviously, we can't show you the case data that we worked on because it's confidential, as you'd expect. So, unfortunately or fortunately, we're going to use the Enron data set, which is one of the very few publicly available data sets, and hopefully give you a bit of a different view on it, because those that have seen demonstrations of e-discovery tools, etc., and Enron is a fairly common set of data to use. So the way we're going to go through it, we're going to use that as the narrative, but not look at, okay, what did Jeff Skilling do, because it's fairly obvious. So, but the background narrative around it, looking at how people interoperated, whistleblowing, insider trading, fraud, or potential fraud. So what we're going to do is I'll just give you a quick orientation on the tool itself. What we have is at the top the date range. So you can see it operates over a 3-year period from mid 99 to mid 02. The way the tool functions is there are 3 separate areas. I'm just going to click on this hamburger menu on the left just to show you've got Prestige, Explorer, Prestige, Change, and then Topic Explorer. Now, I know those on the call are primarily looking at this from the investigative perspective, but there's an important difference between these 2 and the third one. So there's, if you imagine if there was a little line between there, Prestige, Explorer, and Prestige, Change. Prestige is all about how things are being said. So we're not at this point understanding what's being said. So it sits above the GDPR sort of glass bottom. So it can be used to look at any sort of anomalies, changes in behaviour without actually looking at the text. This also helps as well because it operates freely in any language. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk through the Prestige Explorer and Prestige Change. Then we'll go into Topic Explorer, which is where it gets our natural language understanding engine. The key is the understanding there. This is where we'll use some super smart sense vectors to understand what on earth is being spoken about. And we put it into buckets, into categories, so you don't have to think about what are you looking for. It tells you what's in there in a hierarchical structure, but I'll get onto that in a minute. So we're in Prestige Explorer. What you've got along the top is the timeline. You have active users and this sort of, actually in Prestige Change, I'm in the wrong one, apologies. This is the Prestige Explorer. Like timeline across the top, we've got active users, we've got the email activity. So these are the peaks and troughs of what's been happening. Again, these are just statistics, but important ones. The importance here is the active users. We're only interested in communications that are two-way. We do look at, outbound and inbound, but where the interest is if you've got conversations happening. What we're not interested in is all these 73,000 inactive users, which are typically inbound communications from, let's say, marketing agencies or whatever. So we focus on the active. We can see where these communications happen, but where we really kick in is down the bottom here, which you can see we have the prestige ranking and the prestige network. So what does this mean? This is telling you at any given point in time, and time is the key word here, you can see who is having the most impact in the network, the communication network. And a communication network is people talking on the phone, email, instant message, whatever you like. We're not talking about a computer network. This is a communications network between human beings. So who's having the biggest impact? And at this point in time, a guy called Joe Parks is the most important or most impactful person inside of Enron. And we wonder why that was when we first started looking at the data. And you can see his network here. He's got some nondescript people. They're not chief executives of the organization or C-level executives rather of the organization. There are some third parties. But it turns out if you look at the data, Joe Parks, when we looked at some of the emails, just to start this narrative off, I know I've talked about non-GDPR and GDPR, but just to get this narrative going, it turns out that Joe Parks was a trader, and he upgraded himself from a trader to a super user. So that allowed him to modify all the credit settings for all the people he traded with. So all of his customers who used to say he traded with in the thousands of dollars on a daily basis were now trading in the millions of dollars on a daily basis. So obviously making a ton of money. And we don't know, I mean, this isn't part of the case, but Joe, a lot of the people he were trading with were actually Enron subsidiaries, to hide the debt, but that's a different subject. So Joe Parks is important there because his behavior and what he's been doing has promoted him to the top of the shop without us actually looking at the data. But what we're going to do is we're going to go into a particular time frame that's, let's make that a bit broader. So we're going to zoom in, and it's important in the Enron timeline because this is around this time. If we start on the 1st of April, just to sort of set a baseline, the machine itself doesn't know anything about Enron. So we fed it 3 years worth of emails, and it went through and it said, okay, so this is normal behavior is normality. I want to know when things change. So the way that people are operating, communicating has changed. That puts them up the impactful or prestige ranking. And a good sort of bellwether of this was a lady called Louise Kitchen. Louise Kitchen wasn't doing anything wrong at all, because being impactful doesn't mean it's bad. It can be good as well. But Louise Kitchen was a trader from the UK, but ended up running the Enron Online platform. So she built this herself. I don't mean physically built it herself, but she came up with the idea, managed to coerce a number of people and lots of hardware and software to actually build a department that ended up having 200 people in it, which ran all of the commodity trading for Enron. So what our system identifies at the first of every month, because the results are announced, at the close of business at the end of the month, what the trading results were. So the system will promote her for the first couple of days to right to the top of the tree, because she's getting lots of attention from lots of interesting people. And this is where our network here kicks in. So you've got people like Sally Beck and Mark Haydick, both of which are C-level executives in the organization, are communicating with someone who's a lowly trader. So our system sees that as being an anomaly based on the timeline. And that's the principle of this system, because we're all about looking at what's changed. And it can be good or bad. It's not all about finding bad guys. It's just what's different. And you can see it, Louise, this is the ranking. You can see it's a standard bar chart. The numbers go down as the bars get smaller. And you can see you've got people like Jeff Dashovich, who's the head of risk, government liaison rather. You've got Sally Beck, I've mentioned before. These are big cheeses that are way below our friend Louise Kitchen, who still at this point was a trader sitting in the marketing department. Now, if we move forward a bit, we go to the 3rd of April, we see some peculiar behavior. So the system is promoted to the top of the Enron. This is meant to tell us who's important in the Enron network. What it's telling us is that Vince Kaminsky's AOL account is the most important thing in Enron at this point in time. So that's extremely odd. because it should be obviously you'd think it'd be an Enron person. Vince Kaminsky, by the way, was the head of risk management, and this is where it gets a bit interesting, because Vince Kaminsky had started to send, and his network's minute compared to what we saw with Louise Kitchen. If you go back, lots of people talking to her, lots of interesting people. Vince is sending everything home, and that big arrow indicates that he's sending everything home. And he starts doing this from this period onward. So our anomaly detection has actually spotted this, promoted him to the top of the prestige ranking. He's also talking with Duffy, who from our research is a third-party legal representative. But that's not what we're focused on. We're focused on the fact that the system has identified that an odd behaviour is happening, and it actually is fairly obvious what he's doing, because that's an AOL account, as you can see from there. That in itself is just one side of the stuff that can be identified within this, but we could start following threads through. And the reason Vince Kaminsky started sending everything home was on February the 5th, and through the month of February, there was a conversations between Arthur Anderson, who were obviously we know, or used to know, were Enron's auditor, to discuss with Enron. They discussed with Enron rather that they had concerns about the use of Enron's use of special partnerships to disguise debt, i.e. fraud. So, for some reason, Enron managed to persuade them to stay. But our friend, and this was happening through this month, so around this time, there's some interesting activity, i.e. one of which Vince Kaminsky is basically creating his insurance policy. But also you get people like this lady Kay Mann appearing. Now, Kay Mann doesn't appear in any records in an Enron corporate organizational structure. Of course, she had an employment contract, but she's no one of interest in organization. She's got fairly chaotic network. So she appears on our, remember, this is the top 20 people out of 5,308. So these, there's something interesting going on. You'd expect some of the big cheeses like Jeff Dashovich, Sally Beck to be there, because their communications network are, varied. So there's prestige is always quite high because they have impact. But someone like Kay Mann, it's interesting to see what's happening now. It's quite hard to see what's going on there. So what we can do, we've got these two red bars here, and we can slide them up. And as we slide them up, the number of people decreases. So you can see it just gets easier to read. So let's just take it down a bit, because what we can see here is we've got people like P. Thompson talking with Kay Mann, C. Campbell, P. Thompson. We click on again, you can see from AK LLP, a law firm, C. Campbell, again, another law firm, and so on. So Kay Mann is doing some serious outbound communication to third parties. And so we follow this thread through. So let's keep going. Let's fast forward a month to around the 2nd of May. And you can see, Louise Kitchen's back at the top of the shop again, as you'd expect. Another great set of results. Kay Mann's now gone up to number 4. A network's getting even more heavy, and these big thick lines are the amount of communication that's happening. So you can see there's some serious stuff going on here. Let's just pull it out a bit. You can see if we take the traffic down, we can just reduce the noise a bit, so you can see it a bit better. Again, C. Campbell's still there, P. Thompson's still there. And these are people she was talking to before. And as we progress through time, interesting, you go to the 12th of May, we see Jeff Skilling. He's he's the chief executive of Enron, became it on the 12th of February. He comes out in May saying there is no fraud here, don't worry, nothing to see here, in true chief executive style, and then resigned pretty abruptly in August, citing family reasons. So, he appears, because this is abnormal, he hasn't spoken publicly before in such a way and so broadly. But great, that's all well and good. But our friend Kay Mann is number 3 in the hit parade. So she's, again, the network's getting more and more chaotic. Lots of third party, lots and lots of third parties in there that she's communicating around the legal predicament she thinks she's in. And if we get to the end of this sort of thread, Kay Mann is now the number 1 in the prestige ranking. So you see, we followed her progression to the number 1 in the hit parade. Her communication network is madness. She's talking to everyone. At this point, she becomes a whistleblower that was used later on in the case. So, just to show you can actually start dripping out, taking out important people, taking out non-important people by sliding this thing up. You can then take out the noise if you just want to see where the high value or high volume traffic is, and the high value from our algorithm perspective, who do we think is important from a communications perspective. And you can do all of this just from this one screen. What a Haystrat is, we don't have to program any rules into this. We don't give it any idea what it's looking for. We just give it a load of data and let it run. And then it tells us, what's happening, who's important in the network, not to the investigation, because again, it doesn't know what you're investigating. It just knows that things could be off at this place. So if I go down to Prestige Change, which I sort of showed you accidentally at the beginning, similar sort of thing, but we've kept the same time bucket. So we're looking at the, between beginning of the first half really of 2001. So again, remember we said Enron turned up here, Anderson's turned up here, had a chat with Enron, Enron convinced them to stay, even though it was fairly obvious that some fraudulent behavior was happening. And we get these big spikes of anomalous behavior. So this is pointing you, and we can send alerts out to your email, to say, every day what's anomalous, and you just get, a couple of or handful of points. Well, it depends how many anomalies there are, but you get a handful of key things to look at. So if I click on that anomaly there, you can see it's fairly obvious. There's some little stuff down here, but the big change, the massive change, is with Mark Tawney and our friend Mark Haydick. Mark Haydick, I mentioned briefly before, head of legal in Enron. Mark Tawney works in the PR department. So these two just don't communicate, not normally. And so this is the way they're communicating, the frequency, the ferocity of it, has indicated that Mark Tawney's now has got the largest change. So the way we do it, it's not necessarily good or bad, like I said before. It's just the change, the scale of the change. And the reason for that is because he is talking, and you can see all the stats in there, which I won't bore you with now, but the bottom line is it tells you what the traffics are, what our prestige rating is, and it's all about he's talking to someone who has much more impact in the network, and why are they communicating? And if that's, if you really wanted to look at what they're communicating about, we can scroll down, I can show you. But at the moment, we're pretending we're not looking at the comms, because we can turn it on or off dependent on the implementation. And you have a toggle, so legally you can just cut out all the ability to look at any of the underlying communication, or you can turn it on if there's a process in place to do so. So you can see we've got that. And the reason for that, if you look at this, the narrative, is that there was a PR offensive, and that was heavily legally bound around keeping the Enron and the Arthur Andersen stuff. Any whiff of fraud was kept out of the press for a significant amount of time. So they did a good job, those two, because it didn't really come out until sort of August or August, September time. So that's that's the narrative around just following people through from an investigative perspective. But what we can also do is just go back to some interesting stuff. Let's take it back to 7th of March, something like that. And what we can do is we can look at a guy called Darren Farmer. Now, what I'm going to do is actually, let's go back to the Prestige Explorer at this point. So if I look at around the 7th of March, and we look at Darren Farmer, so I can see Darren Farmer's network. So his ranking is really high. Now, Darren Farmer is just he's a logistics manager. He's a mid-level person inside of Enron's organization. Nothing significant, but there's some interesting stuff that he's communicating. And the reason he's been promoted, that over time, if we went to the Prestige Explorer, we could see it. But over time, he's starting to communicate quite a lot with Bilo. Bilo's a third party, is a what you would call it, a vendor, sorry, an external one. And you can see down here, this is the note that's really made them. So we're now turned on, we are non-GDPR compliant, we have an investigation in hand. And we can look here, this is just a note. So Bilo and external, Darren Farmer's starting to appear, it's very important on this day. Why is that? If you click in here, you can see that basically it's talking about insider trading. And thanks to the info on the stock option, that's the closing price, which is just before the jump. Very nice as management, brilliant. Why do you get an option, especially a stock option, when he's not an employee? And so what's happening here? So again, you read into that what you will, but the system has identified this, and it hasn't actually looked at the comms, just looking at what is, how it's being said, not what is being said. But we can then, as an investigator, if we wanted to do this manually, we can actually start looking at what was the communication about that pushed the Prestige up. So that's the first half of the tool. Now, what we're going to do remember we said that on this menu bar, we've got the topic explorer, so Prestige, I've just opened it up here just so I don't have to log in. What this is now doing, this is your analytics engine. So if you want to, so this is where you start putting in scenarios of what you're looking for. Because what we don't want to, what we're trying to avoid you having to do is think of search terms. What we want you to do is say, well, look, what I'm really after is I think there was lots of stuff happening in outside office hours where people were meeting with suppliers, and they were, I want to know what they were talking about, or the comms that came around after, and we know it happened between these dates. So any communications that sort of related to a social engagement. So it's not a search term, because none of those, no one would ever use the word social engagement, or if they would, be very infrequent in their communication. So we're not looking for search terms here. What we're doing is we're creating the, this is how your thought process is going. So what we'd say is, okay, we want, if you're going to do something, communicate with someone, you're not going to broadcast it. So I don't want any more than 4 recipients per communication. I think I said I want it into year 2000. The bad stuff was happening between these 2 years. The other stuff you can actually identify hours in the day if you wanted to. What I'm going to do is just look at, this is what we do and no one else does. What we're going to do is we're going to start looking at the tagging of the data. So we've understood what's being said. So remember I said I want to look at, I want to look at where it's an internal, so it's someone from Enron talking to someone, an external supplier. So what I'm going to do here is just say that I want it to be when the communication doesn't contain Enron, i.e. it's not an Enron email address. I'll apply that filter. So now I've got, it's those 2 years. I've got all of the different types of the classification hierarchy of the comms. Now, if you picture this hierarchy, if you go to the BBC website and you click on BBC, it says world news, UK news, European news. You click on UK, it goes business, technology, sport. You'll click on sport, it'll say rugby, football, horse racing. You click on horse racing and it'll give you all the horse racing results or whatever. You're not searching for horse racing because it probably won't say horse racing in that article. It'll say, red run, showing my age, won yet again at Aintree, etc., etc. Not the word horse racing. And that's what we're doing here. We're classifying data into buckets, but the words don't have to exist in them. So what we said, remember, want to know between these 2 years where it's internal to an external supplier. And I'm interested when they were chatting, they were talking in a leisure environment. So I'm drilling in to leisure. So I know the hierarchy, but it's not a big one to understand. I want to look at leisure venues because I know leisure venues contain things like cafes, restaurants, movement park, bars, nightclubs, etc. So now I've got all the comms that are relevant to stuff that happened in that environment. And if I scroll down to the bottom here, you can see there's not much. I did that. So we've got a list of emails we've actually got. It tells you at the top. We've got 15 comms between 10 users. And you can see here, can you go to lunch today? Still swamped in the office, etc. I've had the fudge stripes and Pringles breakfast, burrito, if you knew sushi. So we're not looking necessarily at the words lunch, dinner, etc. But they're all around, a social engagement. But the big one here is our friend Jeff Dashovich, who again was mentioned in dispatches earlier. He's head of government liaison. He's meeting with one of the senior salespeople inside of Perfect Commerce. And this is around the time that Enron were looking at replacing their online platform. So this, thanks for dinner. Very yummy. Simple communications, but this may, if it's a compliance issue, because it was a locked out procurement cycle at the time, or it's just downright, they're just mates. But the point being, you very quickly got to this point without having to type in a load of search terms. You can also export that if you wanted to out to Excel. So you could put it into, if you wanted to look at those emails elsewhere, you can. But also what you can do is we give you all the search terms. So if I open that up a bit, so that's all of the search terms that you might want to put into your Everlaw, etc. So we're giving you what to search for deeper. So these are all the topics that are in there, that are inside those social engagement categories. And you could then plug this into your e-discovery platform or your review platform. Because it's that simple, so we've got all these different, I'm just going to reset them just so we go back to the top. That's like the clear all filters button. It's just me being lazy rather than clicking all the filters. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take us back to that email analytics, the email search we won't cover today. What we can do is, if if I bring the filters out as well, I'm just going to show you all the topic types that we have, make it nice and wide. So you can see we've got, if you were interested, for example, in looking at abusive behavior or accident and mercy incidents, or let's look at accounting and auditing. So just by clicking on that topic, that tag rather, this category, you can see all of these emails relate to something to do with accounting audit. You know, you've got the word invoice, you've got clean and black line copies. Okay, that could be legal as well, doesn't matter. You know, the word audit appears, great, confidentially data sheets. So this is all being grouped together under these simple categories. I could click on accomplishments, you know, well done, congratulations, etc., etc. So we understand what's being said. And by the way, you know, you could appear, these conversations could appear in multiple categories. So you might start off by talking about, you know, brilliant, did you see the football match yesterday? Ace, Liverpool, brilliant. Go on to how much you voted in the election yesterday and you can't stand the Conservatives. Then you go on to the talking about, well, look, let's dump some dollars. I'll give you the nod, you know, and we'll do whatever. So there are 3 different distinct categories of conversation, and our system will break those up and put them in the appropriate bucket. It's not one bucket suits all. So that's what we do. So it's just, please bear in mind, it's all about, we're trying to tell you what's in it, as opposed to you think what you're looking for. And this is the unknown bit, because it's all about you not having to think about what should I search for, because you will miss stuff. And you know, you hear the word tar a lot out there on these tools where you have to drop the seed in and it grows around it. It doesn't quite work, because if your seed's off, then the diamond, you know, the crystal that grows around it won't be wide enough. Also, there you look at people that provide clustering. So if you just cluster, you still got to work out what on earth the cluster is about, and they cluster on individual words. So it's, you know, it's something. Ooh, the screen's changed. So it's something that we try and avoid. We try and give you real world. This is a category, and these are the topics. And this is the slide. Thanks, Sam. I missed that at the beginning. This is how we do it. So what we do is we bring all the data from anywhere into this unstructured data collecting engine, for want of a better phrase. So you bring it in. So we worry about taking the data off you. You don't have to put it in a particular format. We'll take it in whatever format you can get it. And there are some, you know, we've had some horror stories of data wrapped up in emails that's been wrapped up in someone else's email. Then, so we're used to unpicking all that, and that's all part and parcel of the project. So your IT department doesn't have to get involved. We take the data, whatever it is, we then ingest it. We then process it. We have, you know, 9 or 10 different processes, algorithms that run over the top, that give us the prestige ranking, work out the baseline, look at the anomalies, classify the data, you know, the communication into those buckets, work out the topics. We also do entity identification, which is, we can tell you, if you said, I want to know all the emails that are to do with Oman or Afghanistan, or I want to know all the emails that are to do with banks, give me the list of all the banks named in all my communication, it'll list all that. And then we put it out in the dashboards that you've seen on screen now. So there's no configuration, there's no rules, you know, no team of consultants will swoop in and stay with you for months and months and months. It really is point and click. Once you've got the data, you know, a few days, weeks later, you get it back. That's it.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Paddy. So I think in summary, what we're proposing here is using a technology play, so an AI engine that really kind of guides you as an investigator, rather than leaving everything with you trying to build out your search terms, build out the process. You know, we talk a lot about bias, and one of the challenges with bias, obviously, is there is a high degree of potential to miss the critical information that you are not looking for. So, you know, the real benefits of this, you know, we talk about this actionable intelligence, you know, the real value to any body that is involved in investigative work, whether that be law firms, whether it be corporations, whether it be specific investigative firms like Oculus, is really looking at how you can reduce the physical corpus of data that requires physical human beings to investigate, whilst also driving cost reductions and funding this technology, this type of technology, through the reduction of costs in other areas. So if I look at the two significant values here, it really is about reducing the time to get to the data so you can make a decision on whether there is a case to be had, and then obviously looking at the cost reductions based upon tooling and also physical human resources. So we're going to wrap that up there. Hopefully it was a useful session, and thank you very much, Jonathan, and the guys and the team from Oculus for presenting as well. Very interesting in terms of how you use the technology. And does anyone have any questions? We've got a few minutes, so please use the time if you would like to. Or we'll assume, if no one speaks, that you're all either very shy or our presentation was so incredibly that there are no questions.
I'm not so shy. Hi, my name's Ali.
Hi.
Hello, Alison Norwood. I've got some questions, some of which are probably just sort of very generic. So things like, how do you baseline behaviours? For example, if you're looking for anomalies, you're looking then against a background of expected behaviours, I'm assuming. Yeah. How do you do that?
So if we click, so remember it's start with an empty bucket. And what we're looking for is, so here's a good example. We talked about this the other day. So if you're working in, we've got a case, let's say, in the hospitality industry, their behaviour, how they behave, when the emails are sent, the ferocity of emails being sent, there's gaps in the day because they're, they could be on the floor serving, for example, supposed to be in a head office. So their behaviour is very different to those that are working, let's say, in a bank. And, the time that emails are sent, what's normal, who's in the network. So we have to, the more data we get, the better we are at identifying changes in behaviour. If you give us a week's worth of data, everything's anomalous. You give us 4 or 5 years, we can then work out, it's called temporal analysis that we do. So we do this smoothing over time to work out what's normal. And then you look at where, so if the baseline gives you what should happen, what everyone else is doing, and then you can look at, especially based on departments, etc., because we do overlay departments, you can start to see when things change. This is what they usually do, this is what the group could do, and this is what's happening now. So, and that's what I'm saying, it doesn't know what the anomaly is, it just knows it's different. And that's when we have to go through and look at the data itself and look at the comms.
Thank you very much. It was a really interesting presentation, so I'd like to thank you for providing that today. I do have more questions, but it's probably best if I don't hog all the time and ping them to you directly.
Yeah, no, that'd be, I'd love to. Yeah, send them over, and then we can answer, and I can send you some probably links to stuff that maybe explain it better as well than me sort of rabbiting on. But yeah, please do, because I'll be keen.
Thank you very much.
I'll put my email address in the thing.
The other option, Alison, is we can potentially just set up a separate call if it would be easier. So happy to do that as well.
That's a very kind offer. Thank you very much.
Okay, my email's in there in case you don't have it in the chat.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, well, firstly, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Really appreciate you taking time out your diary, because we know everyone's busy. As I say, glad it was a useful session. Thank you for the feedback, Alison, much appreciated. And obviously, in the fullness of time, I'm sure we'll reach out to you just to see how you would, if you'd like any further information, etc. And again, thank you very much for your time.